Back to the basics. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sources, check. And thick skin, check. Let's go. Welcome to Go to Bluted, everybody. If you're a college football fan, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers, so we would greatly appreciate you helping us get to the 10,000 subscriber mark. So we all know that conference realignment basically took over the college football world over the summer, especially with the Big Ten grabbing USC and UCLA. Last year, it was the SEC grabbing Oklahoma and Texas, and I've made a bunch of videos on what teams could end up where as far as from one Power 5 conference to another Power 5 conference. But what about Power 5 teams that could actually end up in Group of 5 conferences? I think that's a big-time possibility. I have a list of teams that I think is possible they could end up being a Group of 5 team, and I have another list of teams that I think definitely will end up being Group of 5 teams. So first, here's our Group of 5 conferences after conference realignment. The AAC looks much different. Of course, Cincinnati, UCF, and Houston got bumped up to the Big 12, so they decided to raid Conference USA. Here's what they look like now. East Carolina, Memphis, Navy, SMU, USF, Temple, Tulane, Tulsa, Charlotte, FAU, North Texas, Rice, UAB, and UTSA. I don't think it's quite as strong of a conference as it was before, but I will give the AAC credit. They went out and got the best brands available in the other Group of 5 conferences. I think it'll be one of the strongest Group of 5 conferences going forward. Now for the MAC, they didn't get anybody. They still look like Akron, Bowling Green, Buffalo, Kent State, Miami, Ohio, Ball State, Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Northern Illinois, Toledo, and Western Michigan. Same for the Mountain West. They didn't get anybody either. So they still look like Air Force, Boise State, Colorado State, New Mexico, Utah State, Wyoming, Fresno State, Hawaii, Nevada, San Jose State, San Diego State, and UNLV. Conference USA is the one Group of 5 conference that suffered the heaviest casualties. But they did go out and get some teams who I guess help replace those losses. Although I think this is going to be one of the worst Group of 5 conferences moving forward. Conference USA looks like FIU, Louisiana Tech, Middle Tennessee, UTEP, Western Kentucky, Jacksonville State, Liberty, New Mexico State, and Sam Houston State after the additions. I mean, that doesn't even look like a Group of 5 conference. That's how bad it looks. And finally, the Sun Belt. They had some additions as well. They didn't lose anybody. That's a big key to this. They didn't lose anybody, and they did gain a few teams. So here's what the Sun Belt looks like. Appalachian State, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, James Madison, Marshall, Old Dominion, Arkansas State, Louisiana, South Alabama, Southern Miss, Texas State, Troy, and UL Monroe. The Sun Belt could contend with the AAC and the Mountain West as far as being the best Group of 5 conference, but with those additions and not losing anybody, they could be one of the best Group of 5 conferences out there, not only this year, but going forward. But what about the teams that are in Power 5 conferences currently that I think will or could be demoted to the Group of 5 status? So first, I'm going to list the possible teams that could possibly be demoted down to Group of 5 status and where their destination could be. First up, we have Georgia Tech. I do think Georgia Tech is safe, but I do think it's possible that they could be demoted down to Group of 5 status. Where would they end up? Well, I think Georgia Tech would fit perfectly into the Sun Belt. They already have Georgia Southern and Georgia State. You're adding another Georgia team. I think the style of the teams that are already in the Sun Belt matches the style of Georgia Tech. I know that's not what Georgia Tech fans want because it's a demotion. I think Georgia Tech would fit in perfectly. Next possible candidate, Kansas. I think Kansas will be fine. I think the Big 12 survives, but they could be on shaky ice if the Big 12 doesn't survive. Where would they go? I think Kansas would head to the Mountain West. I think they would fit in nicely. Of course, they would straight up own the Mountain West when it comes to basketball, and maybe they could be competitive in football. I think another team that could possibly be demoted down to Group of 5 status, and that's Cal. I've heard Cal could be a candidate for the Big 12 or the Big 10, and that's possible. But if that doesn't happen and the Pac-12 somehow doesn't survive, I think Cal could end up in the Mountain West as well. And I think they would actually be just fine in the Mountain West. The next team that could possibly be demoted that I've gotten a lot of heat about, that's Vanderbilt. I have heard about the Big Ten and the SEC trying to figure out ways to get rid of the low-hanging fruit, and Vanderbilt would definitely be a low-hanging fruit. If they did get rid of Vanderbilt, where could they end up? I hate to kick Vanderbilt while they're down, but I think Vanderbilt could end up in Conference USA. At least they could be competitive there, right? Sticking with the mantra that the Big Ten and the SEC does somehow figure out how to cut the low-hanging fruit. If that happens, I think Northwestern could be cut from the Big Ten. They could keep Illinois and still keep that TV market. I think Northwestern could end up in the MAC. I think Northwestern could actually fit nicely in the MAC, other than the fact that they're an elite academic institution, but sports-wise, I think they would fit in. The next team that kind of fits that mold is Maryland. If the Big Ten were somehow to figure out how to cut the low-hanging fruit, I think Maryland would be on the chopping block, and I think they would also fit in the MAC for the same reasons that I listed for Northwestern. And finally, the last team that fits that low-hanging fruit category is Rutgers, but I think Rutgers could actually end up in the AAC. Rutgers used to be in the Big East. I don't know how they ended up in the Big Ten, but they did, and I think their best landing spot would actually be a decent Group of 5 team. Rutgers keeps surviving and ends up in a decent AAC. Now time for the teams that I do think eventually ends up being in a Group of 5 conference. The first team, Boston College. The ACC is in a lot of trouble. The only thing that's keeping them together is that grant of rights deal, but even that's going to run out eventually, and whenever it does, the ACC will probably get picked apart, and Boston College is not going to have a landing spot in a Power 5 conference. I think they also end up in the AAC for the same reason as Rutgers, actually. Same thing with Syracuse. If the ACC were to get picked apart, I think Syracuse ends up in the AAC, and actually the same situation for Wake Forest. I think they also would land in the AAC. Makes a lot of sense. Once I get to the final look of the AAC, you'll see how much it does make sense. The next team that would be on the chopping block when it comes to the ACC, and that's going to be Duke, but I don't think they would end up in the AAC. I think they would end up in the Sun Belt. I think they're a better fit. I think they would rule the Sun Belt in basketball, and maybe they could be competitive in football as well. And finally, the last two, the first team is Oregon State. If the Pac-12 doesn't survive, I think Oregon State is most definitely going to the Mountain West. The Big Ten is not going to want them. The Big 12 is not going to want them, and that would be just fine for Oregon State. I think they would be competitive. I think they would have a chance to win the Mountain West year after year after year, so I think they would actually fit in really well with the Mountain West. Next team's going to be Washington State. Same reasons as Oregon State. If the Pac-12 doesn't survive, I most definitely think that Washington State's going to go to the Mountain West. Here's the caveat to that. Even if the Pac-12 does survive, they might lose so many Power 5 teams that they might be relegated out of Power 5 status. So this scenario would still hold true, except for they would be staying in the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 would be demoted out of the Power 5 status. I'll leave all the legal technicalities over to the lawyers about that situation. So if all this were to happen, here's what the Group of 5 conferences would look like. We'll start with the Sun Belt. Appalachian State, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, James Madison, Marshall, Old Dominion, Arkansas State, Louisiana, South Alabama, Southern Miss, Texas State, Troy, UL Monroe, Duke, and Georgia Tech. That's not a bad looking conference. For Conference USA, they'd have FIU, Louisiana Tech, Middle Tennessee, UTEP, Western Kentucky, Jacksonville State, Liberty, New Mexico State, Sam Houston State, and Vanderbilt. That could be a winnable conference for Vanderbilt. For the Mountain West, they'd have Air Force, Boise State, Colorado State, New Mexico, Utah State, Wyoming, Fresno State, Hawaii, Nevada, San Diego State, San Jose State, UNLV, Oregon State, Washington State, Kansas, and Cal. That also looks like a decent conference. I think Oregon State and Washington State would be decent contenders year in and year out. Here's what the MAC would look like. Akron, Bowling Green, Buffalo, Kent State, Miami of Ohio, Ball State, Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Northern Illinois, Toledo, Western Michigan, Northwestern, and Maryland. And finally, the AAC. It looks really, really strong under this scenario. They have East Carolina, Memphis, Navy, SMU, USF, Temple, Tulane, Tulsa, Charlotte, FAU, North Texas, Rice, UAB, UTSA, Boston College, Syracuse, Wake Forest, and Rutgers. So it would be the AAC with some flavor of the ACC. I actually really like it. I'm sure a lot of you disagree with me about the possible teams that could get demoted to the Group of 5 status, and a lot of people will disagree with me with the teams that will definitely be demoted to Group of 5 status. So tell me where I'm wrong, what teams did I leave out, and what teams do you think should not be on this list? That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.